And particularly in what Jackie and I do in the equity and community investments team is really shifting public investment towards equity. So if you don't mind going to the next one. And again, our equity and community investments team, we've been working in this realm of justice budgeting and reinvestment advocacy for a number of years across the state. And just to give you a sense of our sort of theory of change in terms of the work that we approach and how we do it, is really trying to empower powerful, knowledgeable, and engaged communities. We really want to bring about inclusive and transparent government, and mostly we are looking at creating policy and funding decisions that are based on equity. So this is briefly what we'll run through today, and I think we already got a bit of that from Daisy, so if we could just go to the next slide. So what is budget advocacy? I think for many of you who are on this call, you may have a pretty good understanding of it already, or maybe a very good understanding, but some folks understandably are a little bit wary or intimidated by what budget advocacy is. We're trying to make that plain, and our colleagues at UPI, the Urban Peace Institute, will make this even more clear in their presentation. But budget advocacy, as we explain, is organizing to change the way that public resources are aligned to meet community needs and also to repair historic disinvestment. And by disinvestment, we mean the fact that public systems have, by and large, not invested in communities of color, and that is where we look to repair that historic harm. Budget advocacy also can accomplish quite a bit. Most importantly, it tells a story about priorities and highlights historical and current inequities in funding decisions. One thing that folks think of when they think of budgets is they tend to think of numbers, spreadsheets, those sorts of things. I think from an advocacy standpoint, what we really try to emphasize is understanding and storytelling, because budget numbers and spreadsheets and things are helpful, but for most people, their lived lives are not lived through spreadsheets. So it's really trying to make the priorities clear through budget advocacy, because obviously where people put their money is typically a good indication of what they are prioritizing. So advocates can utilize these budget insights to empower community members to influence the budget process. And in that process, they can really help serve to align advocates around a set of community priorities. So people's budgets, as is being done here in Orange County, is one example of that, and that's being done up and down the state right now. And we've been honored to work with advocates in a variety of these locations working on. So I just want to break down a few of the key budget terms and sort of concepts so that I think it will be easier for those who are less familiar with this to understand what we're talking about. So if we could go to the next slide. Some of the basics, budgets, for those of you who are less familiar, are forward-looking financial plans, especially at the county level. They're a projection of what will happen. In a year like what we're facing right now, that is more true than ever. Usually budgets tend to look back at the past to understand how to project what's going to happen in the year to come, but that obviously in the scenario we're facing right now is less helpful than ever. Budgets traditionally follow a July 1st to June 30th fiscal year cycle. So there's a sense of there being sort of a fiscal year, but truth be told, that decisions impacting the budget are happening year round, and particularly, as I said, in a year like this where things are changing by the week, by the day, in terms of where money is coming from and how much is going out the door. And also, just because the budget was adopted doesn't mean there can't be modifications throughout the year. So that's something really important for advocates to keep in mind, is that the budget is never a document that has stopped. It's a living document in many ways. So the advocacy around budgets is a never-ending cycle with ebbs and flows, but is one that is a 12-month cycle. So here are some key terms. I will obviously you will all have access to this, so I won't go through them word by word. But just to give you a sense, because these are key for those of you who want to engage in budget advocacy to get the basic understanding. As I said, the fiscal year is the way that budgets typically operate. So unlike a calendar year, there'll be a carryover from June to July. So what we have is right now we are in fiscal year 2021, which can be a little confusing, but that's where we are. A key term is the general fund. That is the jurisdiction's main fund into which most of the jurisdiction's tax and unrestricted revenues, which are used to support the basic operations, go. So for instance, for the county, most of the local taxes go into the general fund, and that's the one that funds most of what we tend to think of as county operations. There are also special funds. We're not going to deal with those too much, nor do I think my colleagues at the Urban Peace Institute will get into that too much, but those are very directly related to certain things that are restricted to expenditures for very specific purposes. Revenues, very simply, are the cash or credits that a jurisdiction gets during the fiscal year as income. And those come from all sorts of sources, things like taxes, fees, fines, interest. And also important to keep in mind that the jurisdictions like the county get a lot of money that is passed through from federal or state programs. So something like Medi-Cal, which is the health program for those who are low income in our state, most of that ends up getting passed through from the federal government to the state government to the county. So the county actually does get a lot of revenue from outside sources that aren't generally coming from local residents. Expenditures, again, very simply, are the payments that are made. Those cover all sorts of things: services, materials, equipment. And last but not least, I think a really important concept is the net county cost. And you might hear this a lot, especially in the current moment that we're in right now, is that folks have focused on net county cost as really how it is that the county is prioritizing the money that it has the most control over. So net county cost is the amount that the county itself is contributing to the general fund from its discretionary revenue sources. Now that in itself is a mouthful, but essentially the notion is that it is what the county itself is paying for through its own taxes, through its own fees and fines, and is the money that the county has the most control over. It's not, there are no strings attached, it's not state money, it's not federal money. And so where the county decides to spend that money is a very good distillation of its priorities. So the process and the decision makers obviously are important as we go into budget advocacy. The process, just to give you, again, a pretty brief overview of how that works. If we could go to the next slide. Basically, the budget process works through a cycle. Department directors, and again, that's all sorts of departments. That's both the sheriff's department, the probation department, the health department. All of these department directors are responsible for making recommendations every year, which they then submit to the CEO. So the county CEO, in many ways, is the hub of where all the budget decision-making gets passed through. In the case of Orange County, that's Frank Kim. And he assembles that all those recommendations that the separate departments have made, and then he formulates recommendations to the Board of Supervisors. So the CEO is in many ways a linchpin for many counties for really understanding the budget. Sometimes the CEO actually understands the budget much better than the Board of Supervisors itself. But ultimately, the board are those elected officials who are setting the budget priorities, the policy priorities, and they are the ones who make the changes and ultimately adopt the budget. So while the CEO in many ways puts the budget together based off what departments have recommended, the board is ultimately the decider, let's say, in terms of what goes into the budget. And budget timeline, again, I won't run through all of this, but as I said, there is like a general ebb and flow throughout the year. And this is a very typical budget timeline. I just want to call attention to, by June 30th, that's when supervisors adopt what is called, the recommended budget, and then they adopt it. And then by June 30th, the end of June, is the supplemental budget. And that supplemental budget is the budget to accommodate whatever has changed since June 30th in terms of additional revenues that they didn't anticipate or additional costs that they hadn't anticipated. So that's where we are right now, is between that budget adoption and the supplemental budget. And every year that's a crucial period, but in a year such as this one, where revenues are changing very quickly because of the economic crisis, this period is especially important. So for advocates to zero in on that June 30th to September 30th time period is extremely important this year, but it's also not to say that after September 30th, we go into hibernation until next year. So what are some of the opportunities and challenges of budget advocacy? There are a number. As I said, We at Advancement Project have worked with localities across the state, but it's important to keep in mind there are a lot of opportunities there. It is a means to correct historic disinvestment, and really, as we're talking about today, and we've talked about across the state, is really an opportunity to rethink and reimagine what public safety looks like across the state. So correcting the criminalization of Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities. And we do that by moving dollars away from law enforcement and incarceration departments into health promoting services, and also directing funds to programs and services in highest need communities. So again, this idea of equity. So not just sort of spreading money across the county without a plan, but really making sure that it's going to those who need it most. But it should be said that this is not a simple process. There are a lot of structural challenges, as we call them, to doing a budget analysis. Budgets are not community friendly. They're not designed to be community friendly. They're drafted by finance departments. They're meant for generally an internal audience that is accustomed to that language, that is accustomed to those charts, and they're usually for compliance purposes. So it is difficult for folks like us to do budget analysis, and that should be remembered. So don't hold yourself to a standard of you should be able to understand it immediately when you step into a budget. Another challenge is that budgets themselves, as I said, are forward-looking, and they at most offer maybe a 3-year look back at revenues and expenditures. So they don't tell much of a historical story, which is a problem because historical context usually helps you understand how your county came to be where it is today. For instance, spending on a sheriff's department didn't sort of land at this level in 1 year. It's been a historical process. So the budgets don't really give you that. You have to go back and look at them over time to get a sense of what that history looks like. So it really puts a lot of onus on advocates like us to do that look back and understand the trends. And last but not least, the budgets themselves are formulated by a county apparatus that doesn't generally apply a fairness lens, much less an equity lens in the development process. So again, it's really going to present much of this data in terms of very dry numbers and charts. It's not really going to give advocates who are thinking about racial equity, who are thinking about racial justice, it's not really going to put it in that sort of frame. So it's really incumbent on advocates to make that story come alive through the numbers. And with that, thank you very much. And I will hand it back to the main presenters. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Next up from Urban Peace Institute, we have Nicole Brown, Senior Policy Associate, and Eric Lam, Manager of Strategic Initiatives. Nicole Brown supports the Urban Peace Institute's criminal and juvenile justice reform work through policy analysis and advocacy. A major focus of her work is transforming the Los Angeles Probation Department and supporting a county-wide vision for youth development that reduces youth contact with the justice system and provides young people the effective and appropriate services. Nicole graduated from USC with a Master's of Public Policy and received her bachelor's degree from Portland State University. Eric Lam leads UPI's technical assistance efforts, which include strategy and program development, comprehensive violence reduction and prevention strategies, policy analysis and reform, and community safety assessments. Eric also supports infrastructure development for gang prevention and intervention services, relationship-based policing initiatives, as well as leadership development and training. Eric is a proud Vietnamese American from Orange County, California. He holds bachelor's degrees in political science and urban studies and planning and University of California, San Diego, as well as a master's of art degree in sociology of education policy from New York University.
Thanks for that, Mims. Thank you all for joining the webinar this evening. I also want to just thank Curb and TJOC for the invitation. It's our privilege to be here. So, so today we're going to be sharing the findings and recommendations from our recently released report titled Investing in Community Health, an Orange County Budget and Safety Analysis. We analyzed the Orange County budget over the last 6 years, taking a look at 4 specific departments most closely connected to public safety and the criminal justice system. This was done through public records requests, primary research, as well as phone calls and emails to department staff. In addition to analyzing the budget, we also described general trends in crime, demographics, and income to assess if budget allocations actually reflected and addressed community needs. Next slide. So before we jump into the actual analysis, just real briefly on who UPI is. UPI is a national nonprofit. We're based in Los Angeles, whose mission is to prevent and reduce violence through policy, practice, and systems solutions. This includes our criminal juvenile justice reform and advocacy, training gang interventionists, residents, and public system actors, as well as developing strategies, campaigns, and conducting research. This particular project is housed in our technical assistance in research. So here's a look at the Orange County budget over the last 6 fiscal years. You can see a general trend of growth. In fiscal year 1920, Orange County adopted a total budget of approximately $6.8 billion. Over the last 6 years, from fiscal year 14-15 to the last fiscal year 1920, after adjusting for inflation, the budget grew by approximately $696 million, or an increase of 11.4%. In fiscal year 1920, public protection was 22.6% of the total budget. That includes the Sheriff's Department, to name just a couple. The budget for public protection outpaced the total growth of the overall budget with an increase of about 15%, while community services grew by 9.6%. We will now share findings from the 4 departments we developed PRAs around, which is the Public Records Act requests, with the District Attorney, Probation Department, Sheriff's, and Healthcare Agency. So the mission of the Orange County District Attorney is to enhance public safety and welfare through vigorous enforcement of criminal and civil laws in a just, honest, efficient, and ethical manner. The Orange County District Attorney fiscal year budget for the last year was $166 million. We found that there's only one CBO contract, CBO meaning community-based organization, that represents 2.8% of the total budget. The majority of the funds went to Waymakers to provide victim and witness assistance programs. This contract also includes about $390,000 for case management services for the Orange County Gang Reduction and Intervention Partnership, known as GRIT, which seeks to prevent youth from joining gangs and is run by the Orange County DA's office, the Probation Department, Sheriff's Department, and various local law enforcement agencies. There is consistent growth and prioritization of the GRIT program and use of gang injunctions. Research indicates that overbroad suppression strategies like gang injunctions do not actually prevent crime, and instead funnel increased contact into the criminal justice system. GRIP is a county-wide program based on school truancy rates of students. One question to consider is, are truancy rates the right proxy for gang membership and involvement? Though there may be promising infrastructure with GRIP, are law enforcement and DA staff really the right personnel to talk to youth about gang prevention and to be working with families? Something to consider.
Great. The next department that we looked at was Orange County Probation Department. So their budget was about $195 million in the last fiscal year, which compromises, it's about 3% of the total budget and about 5.2% of that net county cost, which Daniel described. So this budget actually decreased, and again, as Eric mentioned, just so folks keep in mind, all of the numbers that we're presenting were adjusted for inflation. So meaning, you know, that was accounted for. So this is kind of a true increase or decrease. One of the largest reasons why we found a decrease was largely due to cutting vacant positions and the county's vacant position policy. And then they also made some significant cuts, particularly to the juvenile probation budget, which oversees incarceration and supervision of youth. However, while there was slight cuts, we'll discuss later that that really wasn't proportional in any way to the dramatic decline in youth arrests and youth contact with the justice system. In our PRA, or Public Records Act request of contracts with community-based organizations, we found that probation does contract with a variety of different organizations, and we were not able to find the exact amount of money that they did because some contracts didn't have dollar amounts. However, of those that we were able to ascertain, it was about a little over $3 million a year, which, so even if it's a bit more than that, we still, I think, feel pretty safe to say that it's probably a pretty small percentage of the $195 million fiscal year budget. Next slide, please. And then another budget, the third budget that we looked at was the Orange County Sheriff's Department. So that budget was nearly $1 billion, $747 million. And that comprises about 1/5 of net county cost. And when you add in some other funds that they control, that are some of those restricted funds Daniel talked about, their budget actually is over $1 billion a year. So we found that the budget actually increased by over 21.4% over 6 years after adjusting for inflation. We'll discuss that a lot of that was due to a growth in their administrative services budget, which seems to be the part of the budget that houses costs around construction, which I'm sure some of you are very familiar with and we'll discuss further in our findings. Lastly, when we asked the Sheriff's Department to see what kind of contracts they did with community-based organizations, we were provided with no dollar amount. However, we were able to see that the majority of the small amount of contracts that they provided were pretty much almost all oriented towards staff development, textbooks, and training for staff, and no community services. And then I will also add that there was the first 2 years that we looked at, there was a very small kind of command, as they call it, or division of the Sheriff's Department that was committed to kind of community relations and building trust with community. And after those first 2 fiscal years, it was just cut completely out of the budget. Next slide.
The last fiscal year, the healthcare agency was about $812 million, or about 12% of the budget. The budget has increased by 19% over the last 6 fiscal years, with a notable increase of $100 million from fiscal year 1819 to 1920. One major driver of this increase was the addition of 123 new positions to increase mental health services in jails. Next slide. So we're now going to get into some of the key findings and discussion. So the first couple slides, I think, really began to provide a general overview of just when you look at the budget, just the general trends. You'll notice that our first finding is that despite an overall increase in the Orange County budget, this did not always correlate with greater investment in community-based organizations. From the 4 agencies we analyzed, only the healthcare agency made sizable investments into community-based services. Only healthcare agency gives significantly to CBOs. In fiscal year 1819, the healthcare agency contracted about $234 million to CBOs, about almost a third of the healthcare agency's budget. Orange County has not invested in community-based responses to crime and violence. In fact, while violent crimes covered by the sheriffs have increased by almost 30% from 2013 to 2018, funding amounts to CBOs has remained relatively consistent over the last 6 years. This indicates that spikes in violence and crime do not affect budgetary priorities or allocations to community-based organizations. This may also suggest that community-based organizations likely have no inclusion or influence over public budget priorities and decisions. Public protection agencies likely do not view community-based services as viable options for achieving public safety, nor do they include community-based providers in developing strategies to address violence and crime. Next slide. There is little budgetary focus on measures that prevent and treat violence. Contracts provided by the Orange County Probation show investment of about $3 million per fiscal year, split on services such as transitional housing, vocational training, prevention services, and reentry services. The majority of the DA funds are given to community-based organizations, about $4.6 million per fiscal year. And those go to providing victim and witness assistance programs compared to the overall $6.8 billion budget. There is very little money that is focused on the prevention of crime and violence, or the root causes of poor health. Community investments do not correlate with crime and violence trends, and instead seem to be based on internal agency decisions that might not take into account geographical context, social and economic stratification, income inequality, and other confounding factors that can lead to criminal justice context. Though there are some community-based services being funded, they do not meet the actual scale and scope of the issues. Funding community-based alternatives equitably into targeted areas through community-based prevention and intervention services have proven to decrease violence and increase community safety and health in cities like Oakland, Chicago, and Los Angeles, to name a few. The cost of living, racial inequality, homelessness, and arrests for low-level crimes in Orange County have all steadily increased in recent years. It seems this has also led to an increased reliance on the criminal justice system as a response to these issues, as reflected in the budgets for the District Attorney, Sheriff's Department, and Probation spending on juvenile incarceration. Rather than investing further into an ever-growing and costly justice system, Orange County can invest in more cost-effective strategies that address the root cause of the social issues, uplift families out of poverty, and further contribute to community health and safety overall, not just on the penalization and discipline of violence and crime. Unfortunately, there is a healthy and robust economy of mass incarceration in Orange County. What we need is divestment and reinvestment in an economy and community-based alternatives to law enforcement and incarceration, and in community health infrastructure that is responsive to and led by the most impacted communities.
Oh, sorry. So sorry. Actually, could you go to number 4, please? Go one slide back. So another finding that we just want to touch on quickly, and I kind of touched on this a little bit, was just looking at Orange County Probation. They show very little focus on rehabilitation, which is often a primary, should be a primary focus of probation departments. And there's been a lot of probation, even leaders of those departments themselves across the country that have made statements about the need to, probation should be working itself out of a job and should be really trying to rehabilitate people in their lives and shrink the scope of that department. So as I mentioned, we found that there's only about $3.2 million a year of the contracts that we were able to see, and best practices across the country promote partnerships that actually work to address root causes to help people stabilize and turn around their lives and promote rehabilitation. And so often we see in areas across the country, and while I don't have this data, it would be interesting to know in Orange County, oftentimes things like technical violations are some of the largest drivers of incarceration, just further destabilizing folks' lives rather than the mission and purpose that the department should be serving. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, one back, please. There you go. Okay, so a fifth finding was that criminal justice fees brought in very minimal revenue while placing a very high burden on the people that have to pay those fees. So in particular, we looked at probation supervision fees. A lot of times when folks go on probation, they have to pay the department for that service. I think one of us wouldn't think of that as a service. And those can lead to thousands of dollars in fines and fees. And there was, a national study conducted somewhat recently that found that 66% of people on probation supervision made less than $20,000 a year. Additionally, Senate Bill 190 was passed somewhat recently, I think a couple years ago, which outlawed charging parents juvenile supervision fees, which could often lead to over $10,000. And while that was changed at the state level, and many counties moved to forgive all outstanding fees, that was not happening in Orange County. And so what we found is while these are huge burdens on the families that have to pay these, it only, the fees that they were able to collect for supervision only amounted to about 1% of the total budget. And there was another, in the juvenile probation, there was a fund called Ward Welfare Fund, which charges for at least some phone calls and also some stuff in the commissary of the juvenile halls and camps. And that only produced $135,000 to $180,000 versus $90 million that goes towards juvenile facilities. And so, while this is bringing in very little revenue for the county itself, it's likely creating great burden for the folks that are having to pay it. And then lastly, this will not come as a surprise to many folks on this call probably, but we also found that the largest growth in many of the budgets were driven by the expansion of facilities, and that, but sometimes these facilities and the system are costly and ineffective at addressing the root cause of issues. So as I'm sure you know, they are expanding the music jail facility. And so when we were looking at the sheriff's budget over 6 years, the administrative services section of that budget, which is a particular command or unit of the sheriff's budget, that outpaced all of the other commands. It grew by over 80% to $279 million. And upon digging a little deeper, we found that that particular budget unit is what houses all the contracts and things for facilities. And so clearly the large driver of the growth in the sheriff's budget is the expansion of the jail facility. Similarly, the spending within probation on juveniles, facilities, and supervision has increased by 57% in those 6 years, while meanwhile, juvenile arrests have decreased by 60%. And so one might ask, why is this happening? Even though they even cut some positions, but still this budget seems to continue to grow. And one thing in just looking at the budget that seems to be driving this is the building of the multi-purpose rehabilitation center in the juvenile hall. And they claim to be trying to save money. They closed one area called the Joplin Center and move youth that are supposed to be getting substance use support in the Youth Guidance Center. However, we'll continue to talk about how this is kind of problematic, but it seems that actual physical buildings seem to be driving the largest expansion of these budgets, and they are not addressing a lot of the root causes that are landing folks in jail, like substance use and mental health issues. So yeah, that I think that was one of our last strongest findings. Next slide, please. I think one more slide, please. All right, thanks. So as you can guess, so one of our first primary recommendations is to stop the expansion of detention facilities and reduce the scope of these costly justice systems. So I know many of you are probably stopping working to stop the expansion of the music facility and reinvest these dollars into community services, particularly for housing, mental health, and drug treatment. I encourage you all to check out our report in analyzing arrests and jail trends. The effects after Prop 47 were passed, which reduce the penalties from prison to local jails for drug offenses. It seems that issues related to drugs are a likely driver of a lot of the increase in the jail population. And it was noted, as Eric mentioned with the healthcare agency, that even that agency's growth in budget is due to mental health, the high percentage of folks with mental health issues in the jails. However, jail facilities are inherently bad for people's mental health. And so people, and similarly to a rehabilitative center in juvenile halls or this youth guidance center where youth are supposed to be getting substance use support in an incarceration setting, it is much more effective to address these in community-based settings that are therapeutic and aren't causing further trauma. And I also encourage folks, just really quickly, want to point out that one example of this in Los Angeles County is the Office of Diversion and Reentry. They have a permanent supportive housing program where they divert people who actually have some pretty serious charges. Most of them are felony arrests. And have severe mental health issues. And instead of putting them in jail, they put them in permanent supportive housing with wraparound services. And they found, the RAND study just found that after 12 months, that 86% of those folks had no new felony convictions and were able to maintain their housing, which is way better results than jails, and also have a much lower cost than keeping folks in jail. Next slide, please.
Our second recommendation is to invest in community-based alternatives for community health and safety. What that means for us, I think, is to, by investment, we believe that community-based organizations are viable, trusted, and local alternatives to law enforcement and incarceration. Similar to the economy of mass incarceration that exists, we need to invest in a community-based economy and infrastructure that increases safety through a spectrum of community-based responses and services. This includes organizations in prevention, gang intervention, and reentry services. This strategy proactively promotes safety and prevents crime and violence rather than only responding to it. Community-based organizations, churches, behavioral health providers, reentry services, and permanent supportive housing are some examples of community-based services that address the root cause of crime and violence, while increasing safety for the long term. We also believe that that we should target communities most impacted by violence, including those impacted by the justice system, to redefine and reimagine what public safety looks like and how to achieve it. In order for public safety to improve, we need to reframe and reclaim the narrative on how community safety is talked about and addressed, and how other organizations can and are currently playing a role. We also need to launch and invest in community-based pre-arrest diversion programs for youth and adults, especially considering the high need for more mental health services among those in jail. Our third recommendation is to build capacity for community-based organizations and providers, which means to receive more public agency contracts and referrals through ongoing technical assistance and training efforts. These include, but are not limited to, professional development, data collection and evaluation, contracts and reporting, shared accountability, and communication protocols across agencies, as well as consistent convenings to improve relationships and communication. We also need to develop shared goals and leverage existing community-based coalitions like these, collaboratives and networks to coordinate implementation plans. Next slide.
Another recommendation is to end the collection of criminal justice fees. They often do much more damage than they do good. Primarily also to first forgive all outstanding fees for youth in the juvenile justice system based on that Senate Bill 190 that I mentioned. Over half of California counties have already done this, including neighboring counties all around Orange County. I think in first, of course, discontinuing the collection of fees. And then also a first step, if the county's not willing to do that, is at least to look at how many fees are actually being collected. And oftentimes counties spend more money trying to collect the fees than they're actually able to collect. And so, you know, thinking as advocates, sometimes that's a good first step. And then it's really hard for them to justify what it is. And oftentimes the cost really does outweigh any small benefit the county might be seeing from doing this.
And our last recommendation is to increase budget transparency and community inclusion. It's unfortunate that we had to make this report in order for us to understand but a portion of the budget. We need transparency and community input. We need to institutionalize community councils for budget and program oversight, for accountability and equitable resourcing. We also need to develop mandatory resident and provider input in budgetary decisions and hold quarterly public budget meetings intended for the community and not for politics. Next slide. So this concludes our presentation and our briefing. We do invite you to take a deeper look at the report at the link right here for more specific data, findings, and recommendations. We're excited to continue to support the People's Budget OC and the very urgent push for justice and systems change. Know that you have allies with us here at Urban Peace Institute, so feel free to contact either me or Nicole if you have any further questions.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eric and Nicole, for that information that I think a lot of folks will find really helpful as they begin to understand what's at stake in Orange County, especially with the hearings that are taking place next week. So what we'll go ahead and do is we'll go ahead and have Advancement Project finish out by showing us how folks can apply what we've just learned into action by advocating at the hearings that are taking place with regards to the budget. So I will turn it back over to Jackie and Daniel, who will close us out, and then we'll have an opportunity for Q&A once that presentation is done.
Thank you so much, Daisy, and thank you everybody for joining us on Thursday, 6 o'clock, 6 to 8, so just really appreciate it. So I'll close this out briefly on the budget advocacy. As you heard earlier from my colleague Daniel, we've been doing a lot of budget advocacy and working in campaigns and coalitions with various communities across the state where we've been deep in some of the work around defund the police, and then also efforts to move dollars into park projects, health programs, and just every kind of whole thing you can imagine, whether it's calling for more affordable housing and whatnot. So again, just really appreciate y'all. If we can go to the next slide, please, that would be great. So one thing, when we've done this work a lot, we felt it would be very helpful to kind of provide folks with a little bit of a roadmap in terms of how to go about some budget advocacy campaigns. Some folks are very well versed in it. They've been doing it for many years, like our colleagues at CURB and Urban Peace, and then other folks have been learning more about how to advocate around the budget. So we thought we'd provide this short guide, right? The first thing that we would always recommend when you're getting into this work is to really understand community priorities, a vision for success, and understand that budget timeline. And we kind of talked a little bit about this. The main point here is really be rooted and connected in community, so you understand what the end goal is and where folks want to eventually land. So y'all can imagine this work is so difficult because so many of these there's a lot of entrenched, powers that are making sure that there's more money going into, sheriff's department, into incarceration, into jails, into policing. And so, this fight is going to be a long-term one. And so having that vision for success is incredibly critical. Then there's like the really technical, wonky stuff around, conducting a budget analysis. Here, you can just look at the, oftentimes you'll see charts and you can see where the money is. I mean, at a high level, you can do that really quickly. Then you can go really deep into the numbers, and usually, some folks are like, I'll pass on that, but maybe there's a partner or a person within your team organization that actually really wants to go into it, right? And so the best thing to do there is really go back and look at 10 years or even beyond the pre-2009 recession levels to see what's going on. And like our partners at UPI did, they were able to bring that information together, and that's incredibly helpful because it's telling us a story of disinvestment. It's telling us a story of over-reliance and over-investment in, like public safety, right? Which we all know is just, words for more jailing and policing. So once you have that information, it's incredibly, you can plug it in to support the asset y'all have, which then goes into that third piece, which is, how to then put together a budget demand. And most of the time we have a sense, and community has a sense of where they want money to go, right? And so here it's just putting together a list that again, followed by those community priorities, to then provide as an alternative to, again, more policing, more incarceration. We can get way more technical in that area, but again, being able to provide an alternative vision is incredibly important as we're looking to dismantle and like previous systems of incarceration. The fourth thing is we really encourage y'all to get a sense of like who the decision makers are, and engage with them. Sometimes you may not get very far there because again, some of these elected officials may be very closely aligned with unions, police unions, public safety unions. And so there it's an outside strategy, right? It's like pushing from the outside and then utilizing that information and move your campaign forward. And by doing that, you're building power and you're making your voices heard through the budget process. So this is like just a really quick guide. We felt like it would be helpful in the work that y'all want to continue doing in Orange County. If we can go to the next slide, please. So, one other thing, and I won't spend too much time here. I mean, we've done so much analysis in the past and sometimes it's too much, right? At the end of the day, it's like you have to be able to tell a very short and compelling story. And so here, they're going to try to distract you and bog you down in some of the details of the budgeting. I feel like for moving an advocacy campaign, moving a coalition, and then also just making sure that community understands what's happening, you want to keep it synthesized and high level as possible so that people feel like they enough to understand what's going on. But then again, being able to provide that alternative vision, which is where you do want to spend time focusing on. Again, a budget advocacy is just advocacy. Again, you want to connect it to power building. You want to connect it to a broader systems vision, right? Budget advocacy is a tool, is a means to get you there, but it's not the thing in its own. Oftentimes as you do this work more and more, you might find that, as elected officials start to feel the heat, they may try to give in, they may try to give one-time allocations. So you'll hear them say, okay, we'll give, 50,000 one time for some kind of community project or program. We don't want to undermine how hard it took to get that, but we also just want to acknowledge that what we're looking for is we're trying to push for systems change, right? And so one-time allocations are great, but at the end of the day, what's that broader vision? And that's where, we want to be pushing for. Again, you'll see contract services and, I won't necessarily go too far down there, but again, those are usually the easier stuff to get in a budget advocacy campaign. What's usually harder though, but more durable is ongoing funding. So once, folks within, decision-making power make decisions of like, okay, we're going to hire staff, we're going to pay for these big infrastructure projects that require ongoing funding for many, many years. That's how you get that structural funding. That's where you want to move, right? You want to move money outside of, policing and jails, and you want to move in for hiring people to do some of this work in other departments and other programs. And so those require permanent positions, they require new departments, and they require general fund spending, those flexible dollars, because that's where, there may not be enough funding coming from the state or federal government to push this. And again, almost everything that any kind of budget advocacy campaign is a defund the police campaign. And what we mean by that is that so much money is already committed to public safety as they define it, right? Policing and jails, that there's very little left over for other programs and services that we call for. And so in order for us to actually build and envision those healthier communities, it has to come from there. You know, we can always push for new tax measures, revenues, raise taxes and everything, but at the end of the day, even those get co-opted by these systems. And so whatever we're doing, it is going to come at, we need to look at the system that we're in because it's not working and it's failing Black and Brown communities. If we can go to the next slide, please. So here are some links to where you can find information if you want to go into the details. I'm assuming, I know Daisy, I think this will be sent out and it's linked from our presentation. So y'all can go in and be able to access information from the Board of Supervisors where they, you know, provide key budget message information telling us, you know, what they think is happening in the budget. Then you can go into charts, summaries, and things like that that you may need for some of your research. If we can go into the next slide. And then I think the last thing, you know, that I'll leave you all with is that right now it's actually very difficult to participate in a budget process. And that's because so many of these systems have been, you know, traditional forms of public engagement have been shut down or really modified or limited because of COVID-19. So before, even especially at a county level, it was already hard to advocate around the budget because they may have 1 or 2 hearings, usually held during the day, very late in the game, right before they vote on the budget. And that was already difficult. Now it's even further difficult because those are done virtually. People can't show up in mass and protest there. We can still do that outside, but again, it's not in the chamber. And so that makes it much difficult for these folks to feel that pressure and that heat from community. And so what we're seeing in other places is, you know, some localities have been trying to do virtual meetings, but again, there's challenges around documentation not being accessible, not being translated. There's also issues where they try to limit participation by either, you know, cutting folks off, giving them 30 seconds, 2 minutes, or just allowing comments. And then elected officials just are harder to engage because they may ignore requests for meetings or not look at their inboxes, right? There, as you know, letters and pleas for you know, changing the budget come in. So you know, we hope that once things lift next year, God, praying, you know, hopeful that eventually we can all be back in person and being able to push in person without fear of this pandemic, that we're going to be able to push even harder next year once, you know, the budget season resumes in the second half of the year. So thank you. These are our handles. You can reach out to us there. If you'd like to learn more about the work that we've done in Orange County, you know, we spent a lot of time working in Santa Ana with our partners there. So feel free to reach out to us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jackie, for that wealth of information that you shared with everybody tonight. So what we'll do now is we'll go ahead and ask some of the questions for both Advancement Project and Urban Peace Institute that we have collected from the conversation. So there were actually a lot of questions in regards to probation. So Nicole, I don't know if you're able to advise as far as whether probation gets less money from the budget when it has less people under their supervision.
So thank you for that question. Most of we're pretty limited in the sense that we just looked at contracts and the budget and then like a little bit of extra information. And so a lot of the context is up to all of you great people in OC that really understand how some of these systems work. So in the budget, they do not report how many people are supervised. In the early part of our report, if folks check it out, we were able to look at a lot of indicators that are publicly available, like numbers of people in the jail population, folks, number of people who are pretrial, and also arrests, because those things are all publicly available. So I don't have info on the number of people supervised. However, I can speak to my own experience and what I was able to draw out of the juvenile side, which I know much better. And so juvenile arrests in Orange County across all different types of arrests, felony, misdemeanor, and status offenses have decreased by about 60%. And we didn't see that budget decrease at all. And so I'm inclined to say that doesn't matter if the number, and I can say certainly here in LA County, our incarcerated youth population has declined by probably 70%, and the budget has not moved, and sometimes it astonishingly continues to grow. So if I had to guess, I would say that might still be the case in Orange County, unfortunately.
Thank you for that. And the next question I have here, I think might be for Jackie and Daniel. Would it be easier to target decision makers for a budget, or having sympathetic allies being elected or appointed to those positions?
That's a great question. This work is so difficult. Once you may have sympathetic allies, folks that may even have come from at times like community adjacent organizations, not always from the community itself, but once they're in there, they're feeling the pressures of like and feeling the pressure that they get maybe from police unions around, you know, even saying like, if you don't vote this way, you know, we're going to challenge your election. That actually happened in Santa Ana, where one of the council members voted to not give an increase to the police contract, and then they tried to recall her. She was not, she was sympathetic, but I don't think she was necessarily aligned with community. She was coming more from a conservative side of like small government and whatnot. But even there, you saw that backlash. And so I would say that it's going to require an inside-outside game at some point, because these budget decisions are always in the hands of people. That's why you see efforts at LA County around Reimagine to take that decision out, right? And do a ballot measure to say, you know what, we're going to put it to voters to decide how we start to reallocate some of the money away from public safety. And so that's where y'all have to figure out, like, what is that approach? Do we have the votes we need? At the supervisorial level, if you're at a county, or at the city level, if you have the council there to be able to kind of vote for change in the budget. And if that's not there, then it's what other options do we have available to us to actually move that agenda. And that's a tough call, because those are conversations that are difficult. I will say that in other places where we've advocated, when we have sympathetic allies and maybe we don't have enough of them, there are also really great allies to just share information about what's happening on the inside. And so we use that information, and even data. We've gotten a lot of data in the past from the folks that then allow us to make more informed decisions around what we ask.
Awesome, thank you for that. And just echoing what's been said in the chat, that there was a ton of questions on probation. I do want to ask a question, Nicole, regarding the Sheriff's Department that was discussed. Does the Sheriff's Department budget include what individual cities spend on the sheriff, or is it just law enforcement spending on the county level?
I believe that that the contracts will be present there. So so yeah, if cities contract with the Sheriff's Department, that will be reflected in the budget.
Great, thank you so much. And something that I think, I'm not sure if either Nicole or Advancement Project is able to address is, do probation officers get financial incentives for rearrests?
Maybe Jackie or Daniel know more about this. I've been pretty deep in probation, mostly on the juvenile side, but actually looking quite a bit on the adult side too, and I've never heard of that. And I will say there were some limited key outcome indicators. What's interesting, if you all do look in the budget, in Orange County's budget, every department shows their indicators, and rearrest was one. And, you know, they try, you know, like, I think that probation does actually try to, you know, it in some ways, I think it does count against them, kind of, but they don't seem to be particularly worried about it. But I don't think anyone's incentivized, like rewarded for that.
Awesome, thank you. And Jackie, I wasn't sure if you were going to chime in, but if not, I could move on to the one last question before we close out the Q&A, just for the purpose of being mindful of the time. Is there any budget work being done on police and sheriff union? And that could be either Advancement Project or Nicole.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, Nicole, if y'all are doing any work on this. So my understanding, there's actually work already looking into investigating police contracts, and also, and more in Santa Ana. I'm not sure if it's been done at the county level. There are also efforts to get a better understanding of the police unions themselves and how they wield their power, how they utilize their power during budget decisions. So that stuff is happening now. And my understanding is that they're looking to hire folks that have some of that experience, whether being on the other side of government, right, having to negotiate these contracts, these unions, to get that information out into community. But I do suspect that that'll most likely be work that gets done later this year and into next year.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the insight. And then because we only have a limited amount of time for Q&A, I did jot down the questions pertaining to that would pertain to Urban Peace Institute. So Nicole said in the chat that they'd be more than happy to address some of those questions via email. So we'll go ahead and send those to you, Nicole, and to Eric. And we'll send those out to the list of folks who attended tonight's session. But thank you all so much for joining us. And for the amazing information you presented tonight. So we'll go ahead and move on to the next part of tonight's presentation, which is with the People's Budget Orange County. So Kathleen Ripley is a community activist with the People's Budget Orange County. She has previously participated in local campaigns and voter registration efforts. Kathleen studied at the University of California, where she received her bachelor's degree in public policy, planning and management, and her master's in urban planning and design. She currently works locally in home building and is passionate about housing and community organizing. So Kathleen, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you for the presentation on the People's Budget Orange County.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Daisy, and thank you, TJOC and Curb. And oh my goodness, thank you, Daniel and Jackie and Eric and Nicole. I cannot wait to reach out to all of you guys and get some of your great information up here on ongoing with our campaign. If you could go back one slide, that would be great. All right. And so just a little bit about me. I am just a community activist. I have a full-time day job, and I came to do this work through, well, actually, I grew up in Orange County. I moved away for school, moved away as long as I could until I found myself back here because I wasn't very proud of the fact that I came from Orange County, given the lack of, empathy and attention to other people in the community. So when I did come back, I joined a few organizations to see how I could give back and help change the county into something I could be proud of, where I came from. And so one of the groups that I joined was the Housing is a Human Right, and here in Orange County. And it was through that group that a group of us in that group were really inspired by the work that the LA People's Budget has been doing and the success that they found, that we decided to start this campaign of a People's Budget for Orange County. And the People's Budget Orange County our vision is a participatory long-term campaign to get individual community members and organizations involved in fighting for a budget that reflects the values and priorities of the people of Orange County. And so now we can move to the next slide. And so what we've been able to do so far, and I'm so happy looking at Jackie's slides. I feel like we're following the steps she laid out. So one of the first things we did was we designed and came up with a survey to go out to the broader community that really just asked them, hey, how would you want this money to be spent? These are your tax dollars. Where would you like to see them invested? And we launched that survey. So that's one of the first things we did. Sorry. And And just so you guys know, we just formed this group. I look back today at our emails. So our first emails as a group were June 22nd. So this is all brand new work that we're doing. Let's see if we can get the slides back up.
1 second, my computer is just like
Okay.
doing it.
It's okay, that's all right. Yeah, so in general, the survey asks people, it's really simple, and it basically, the majority of the questions ask people on a scale, from 0 to 4, 0 being not at all important and 4 being absolutely essential. Which departments, programs do you want to see your tax dollars invested in here in Orange County? And so that included public health, affordable housing and supported services, health and mental health programs, investments into children and youth, environmental conservation and climate change, anti-racist education, community building and human relations, rent relief, the district attorney's office, the sheriff's department, and jails. So those were the key questions in our survey. We also had open-ended questions that allowed people to write in things that they want to see more investment in. And let's see, do you think we can get the rest of the slides back up? Aha, there we go, cool. So a second part of what we've been doing at the same time as launching the survey is we started doing some of our own budget analysis work, which, my goodness, everybody who spoke before is absolutely right. This can be really hard to dig in and find the details that we're looking for. But we've done some of it, and I cannot wait to use some of the work that the presenters have already done to help our campaign today. And so, as you can see, and as some of the presenters showed earlier, that the sheriff coroner department here, this graph shows you just the discretionary funding, how much has increased. So, over the last decade, the county has decided to spend 151% more in increases in the sheriff's department, while keeping the social services agency almost flat, and actually decreasing the amount of discretionary funding they're willing to spend on community health. Some other work we've done is that we're starting to dig into is to see where is all this money going. And when we look at some of the journalism here in Orange County, they've said it's going to sheriffs, but it's going to raises basically. And as you can see here, like the sheriff's department, they make really obscene amounts of money, and that's not even including the benefits they get. And they're paid out higher benefits than all the other county employees, double the benefits that other employees like behavioral health nurses, child support specialists, they receive double the benefits that those other county employees get. So these are some of the things we're doing to analyze where this information, where the money, where your tax dollars are going, and to help get more Orange County residents on board, because we understand that a lot of people here in Orange County are very supportive of law enforcement. And that's great, that's fine, but do we need the average sergeant to be making over $200,000 a year? So we can move on to the next slide. So another big part of what we've been doing is we've been reaching out right away. We reached out to a lot of the different organizations that our community, our members of the Housing is Human Right are also involved in, and friends of friends, and we've been able to get a really great broad coalition of organizations to already join our campaign, and we're always looking for more people to be involved. So we can move on to the next one. Okay, and then another big thing that we've done over the past couple months is developed a website. And we really hope that this is a long-term platform that can be used by community members and organizations for years to come. So we recognize that while we were lucky this year and that the budget hearings and process was delayed because of COVID, and we did have these 2.5 months to put together this information, get more people involved before they have the budget hearing. We recognize that we may not have a huge impact this year, but that's okay. we are going to keep this up and keep the pressure on the Board of Supervisors. And hopefully in the future, we can also use this as a platform for individual cities within Orange County and to pressure their city councils and their budgets. So we can move on to the next slide. And so this is some of the information we've already been able to put up on the website. So we have a whole section on explaining how the budget works, how to get involved. Our survey is up there. And so it is the peoplesbudgetoc.org. And we'll post that up and put it in the chat as well. But so we have the survey up there. We also have another call to action where we're collecting stories from people in Orange County that we would love to share how individuals in Orange County would really like how would they like to see their tax dollars spent and what kind of a difference can they imagine in their community. And we also have instructions on how to contact your Board of Supervisors to figure out who your supervisor is, how to give public comment, and then we're also collecting information about, in general, things that are working. So learning about participatory budgeting, learning about what's working in other cities, learning about alternatives to incarceration. Hopefully this will be a platform to keep going and keep spreading the information to our community here in Orange County. So we can, yep, thank you. So currently, like right now, we're furiously working on finishing our People's Budget report. So we've had over 1,000 responses to our survey already. And while we're planning on releasing the report at the day of the budget hearing, so next Tuesday, we can share with you guys. So these two word clouds are what people wrote in for the answers to the question. What else, if anything, do you think the County Board of Supervisors should invest in and should take money away from? And I don't think it's surprising to anybody on this call that people in the community really want to see investment in schools, housing, mental health services, education, small businesses, and they want money taken away from the law enforcement, jails, sheriff, and militarization of police, and so on. All right, and then this here is kind of what's next. So as I said, and a few of the other speakers said before, next week on Tuesday and Wednesday is the County Board of Supervisors budget hearings. So we are planning on doing a rally outside the Board of Supervisors before the meeting happens. And then we're also putting together kind of instructions and talking points for community members to address the board on budget priorities. We're going to release our survey. And then we're also going to do a follow-up webinar. I believe it's going to be on Wednesday, the 2nd, on the budget hearing, on our results and our report, and other ways to keep staying involved in the budget process. And I think that's all the slides I put together. Yep. So love to take any questions and love to get everybody involved.
Thanks so much for that that beautiful presentation, Kathleen. We do have a couple of minutes for anybody who is interested in asking Kathleen some questions pertaining to the People's Budget Orange County. So if you have any questions regarding the presentation they just made, feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A, and we can get that answered before moving on to the final section of the presentation that we're giving folks tonight, so that way everybody can arm themselves with the information they need to advocate effectively during next week's hearings.
So our first question is, if moving a budget out of a decision maker's hand into a public decision, it would require a vote, which means it would require education of the public, which means an advertising campaign larger than the opposition. Am I right? Question mark. I don't know if you have an answer.
Yeah, I think that right now, like, our campaign is working on trying to address the budget issues and what the community wants in the framework that we have to work with right now. So right now, we have to, what we can do as Orange County residents is pressure our Board of Supervisors. There is not, there's currently not a referendum or a ballot measure to put it up to a vote, but what you can do is pressure your supervisor. And if they don't vote with the way the community goes, then you can vote them out. And that's what we got to do.
The next question is, have you reached out to any Board of Supervisors about the Orange County People's Budget?
I specifically have not, and I think most of us have not at this point. I could be wrong, but I think we're hoping to, take them a little bit by surprise next week. We didn't want to have them, ready and fully armed to, refute things we have to say.
Thank you. The next question is, have you reached out to any Board of Supervisors about the, oh, sorry, that's the question I just read. So this question is from Ruth. I'm Ruth, if my name isn't set right. I hesitate to come into this space with the question that I personally can't escape, fearing that I haven't earned space for it and respecting the community I share space with here. Feel free to include this in our discussion or not. This is more of an ATI question, and it is sensitive. As an abolitionist organization, does TJOC, I think this question not for the Orange County People's Budget?
No, this one's for TJOC, but I can address that. So Ruth had asked if, as an abolitionist organization, TJOC believes that there exist adults who commit violence, for example, perpetrators of human trafficking, people with privilege that repeatedly abuse their power at a large scale, for whom release and reentry should not be the goal. Ruth states that they love every ATI proposal they have read, but if they were all to be implemented, are there any cases left where the risk to others of release outweighs the benefit that could possibly be given to single out an individual? So Transforming Justice Orange County agrees that there are multiple ways to stop people from perpetrating harm that do not put them in cages. We have not seen that a person who has been caged has benefited more than they would have in a human community environment, but otherwise supported and alternatives to committing harm. So in addition, these types of environments can be provided at a much lower cost than a jail. A jail cell does not provide a person a supportive environment for any human being. Jails only serve to perpetuate harm cycles. And this is just based on the experiences that we have from listening to folks who have that lived experience. So just to answer that question right there, there is one question that I saw that was missed that is for the People's Budget Orange County, and that was in regards to, let me just see if it's here. I just saw it. 1 second. Just 1 second here. Oh, I think it was regarding the Board of Supervisors, but I think that's the one that Kathleen had answered. So with that being said, thank you so much, Kathleen. And just to move us along in the agenda so that way we don't go over on time, I'll go ahead and close us out with the last section, which is how to provide public comment, which was something that was asked in the Q&A. So next Tuesday, and Wednesday, the Orange County Board of Supervisors will be holding the budget hearings where they will discuss the finalized budget for the fiscal year 2020-2021. This is going to be the very last time that people are able to give public comment before the final budget gets voted on. This is an opportunity to ask the board to divest from expanding the carceral state and instead investing those funds into creating community systems of care, something that we have touched on throughout this entire workshop series. So we want to teach everybody how to be able to speak at the Board of Supervisors hearing through public comment. The Orange County Board of Supervisors currently accepts public comment either in person or via email. They recently changed their policy over the summer regarding the reading of public comments that were sent to them via email so that they could be read aloud during the hearing. And this was in order for them to be able to comply with the American with Disabilities Act if they indicate in their email that they are someone who has a disability that is preventing them from being able to attend these hearings in person. these comments do need to be sent to County Counsel Leon Page. And unfortunately, Orange County Board of Supervisors hearings are not set up yet to have a call-in system like several cities in the county do, other neighboring counties, and even at the state legislature, where call-in systems have been made available for folks to be able to access these hearings if they are not able to show up in person or send the email. So just some background information on what these hearings are like. So the Board of Supervisors typically meets every second and fourth Tuesday of the month, starting at 9:30 a.m. at the Hall of Administration in Santa Ana. You can sign up for public comment by filling out a speaker request form and turning it in. And then once you are called up, you will then have up to 3 minutes to speak. This could be subject to change based on either the number of people who are showing up for public comment, or for whatever reason, the clerk decides to limit that period of time that people are able to utilize to give their public comment. So in general, it's always best to just have your comments prepared and be ready to, if you have to snip your public comment short because of time constraints, that is something that could happen. So if you are unable to finish your public comment in person, you can always submit a printed copy of it to the board, or submit it via email. And for those who are not able to attend these hearings in person, it is highly recommended that you submit your comments via email before the start of the meeting. Anybody is able to submit public comment. These are seen by the Board of Supervisors member. They become a part of the public record, and it's very important as a part of advocacy that we submit comments as best we can, either in person, or if not, then in writing. There is a link that I'll drop in here in the chat for folks to be able to read some more information about tips on how to address the board. But I'll actually be going over in the next slide how to best tell the story that you're trying to portray with talking points. So if you could go to the next slide, ma'am. So talking points are bullet point key messages to a campaign. They have a few qualities that elicit the response that you want to get. So in order to, and actually it's one slide before Mims. There, thank you so much. So you want to address your audience by starting out with the way you want to address them, either honorable members of the board or whatever variation you want to use to indicate, that you're addressing the body of the supervisors. And you also want to indicate what district you reside in if you are a resident of Orange County. That way they know if they're sitting there listening to these public comments, who their constituents are that are coming in and what it is that they are asking for. You also want to state your demands clearly. So you want to say, I'm here, and right away after you introduce yourselves and what area of the district you live in, if you are a resident of Orange County. State why you are there. So I'm here to support or oppose the agenda item that you're there to discuss. And you don't have a lot of time to make this point, so you want to make it as soon as you are introducing yourself at the beginning. You also want to leave a lasting impression. So providing a narrative about why this is important to you. If you are comfortable with sharing your experience, then this is really the best way to make them remember you. Narratives are very, very important, and that's kind of what we've seen is legislatures and meeting with various legislators and even elected officials. The one thing that they always say is, if you bring them like a personal story or something to make them remember a certain policy, that stays with them more than giving them facts and basically figures that they can read in a book. So if that's something that you're comfortable doing with sharing your experience, then this is a great way to get your message across and really humanize the issue and the policy that is at stake. Often it is people who are impacted in the system that are called upon to share their stories, which can be re-traumatizing in having to repeat your experience. So if this is something that you don't want to do, then that's totally fine. But if you are comfortable using that platform to share your story, then this is the perfect way to do that. You also want to make sure you open up the possibility for long-term collaboration. Make the connection between the motion that you're advocating for and the long-term vision to make sure that this is something that they can see folks are asking for, especially with now that a lot of people are jumping into this unity of asking for defunding the police. We're not going to go away if we keep on asking for it, and being able to make the connections with the existing policies that they are discussing, the budgets that they are approving, to make them see that this is something that needs to be addressed in order to create the world that we want to live in. And you also want to provide alternatives. So if you are speaking on something, for example, that you are opposing, such as funds going towards the sheriff's department, then you want to state that, and you also want to provide an alternative. That way they're not left just thinking like, okay, and so what do we do if we don't fund this department? So you can provide an alternative such as shifting those funds over to housing, alternatives to incarceration, more treatment in the community setting, whatever you are able to tie that into, that is shifting that away from keeping the responses being to fund departments like the sheriff's department, like the probation department. So we want to make sure that we can try to get them to see and consider the alternatives that are available to them, and also just to give them some creativity. So if you spark that idea in their brain that this is the possible solution, especially seeing how, for example, our partners in Los Angeles County have been doing a lot of amazing work, and making them see that this is something that can definitely happen and be possible in our community. So just making sure you provide those alternative solutions to them, so they can consider that in their discussions moving forward. And always close with your demand to reiterate the position that you are trying to do. Repetition is very, very important. So we're going to go ahead and go to the next slide, which is talking about the typical structure of what public comments look like. So this is an example of what I just walked you through, where you address your audience by saying, for example, I'm going to just give an example for folks to see how what I'm going to say ties into every single one of the points that you are looking at on here. So for example, honorable members of the board, my name is Daisy. I'm a resident of District 4, and I'm here in strong opposition to item 5, which gives $100,000 to the sheriff's department to provide mental health treatment in county jail settings. I'm the daughter of a mother with severe mental health illnesses who would greatly benefit from receiving treatment in the community instead of inside a county jail. My family would benefit from having my mom be removed from a carceral setting and instead be placed in community care to treat her mental health problems. I strongly urge you to vote no on item number 5, and instead I invest into community-based programs. So this is just a very short summary of what that looks like. But like I said, you are typically given up to 3 minutes, so you'll have a little bit more time to expand on your story or whatever story it is that you'd like to tie into this, because narratives are really what compel people and really get to them. So, but this is if this is something that you don't want to relive, you don't want to share it and hash out again your life story, you don't have to do that. But if this is something, like I said, that you're comfortable with doing and willing to use to educate people, then this is perfect, because everyone has a different set of facts. Intellectual arguments are less likely to change someone's mind than something that comes from the heart, something that is true, humanizing, and really painting the picture for them to see that this is affecting whatever policies they're deciding on, whatever budget that they are deciding on. This is going to affect the lives of real people who are suffering from the impacts of the decisions that they are making. So if you have permission to share someone's story, or if you have the capacity to share your own, then if you want to use this platform, we highly encourage you to do so. And just again, stating that repetition is key in stating your message. One of the things that is often very popular in our movement is the saying that you can't get well in a cell. And that's something that folks have remembered time and time again, because it's been repeated in so many different settings and rallies and meetings. You can't get well in a cell. And so repeating your key message to folks will really stick with them, and they'll realize that this is something that a lot of people are asking for. And so the next slide that I'll go over is just some tips when you're giving public comment. So as you practice, the first one is to write out your message and practice beforehand. Folks who may not be have as much experience with giving public comment like myself, for me, I found it very beneficial to write my message out and practice saying it out loud a couple of times. If for example, I get nervous speaking in front of people, and so it's always good to write down your message and practice beforehand. That way, once you get up to the podium to speak, you feel much comfortable after having repeated this a couple of times. And you also, as you practice, time yourself and consider recording yourself a few times so that way you can play it back and improve each time. You also want to be confident, assertive, and emboldened in what you're saying. So that way you're not coming across as unsure in your tone of voice or uncertain and questioning, because then that comes off as maybe this is something that you are not really 100% on board. And so definitely, like I said, if you practice beforehand, you'll develop that confidence to really come across that this is something you are strongly believing in whatever position it is that you are asking them to vote on. You also want to be strategic with your tone and intentional with your emotions. So this means choosing to be respectful or calm, or versus coming across as outraged and passionate. This is something that I observed when, I don't know if folks were following the debate around the masks, when there were a lot of folks who were providing public comment at the Board of Supervisors hearing a couple of months ago. There were folks who were in strong opposition to the order that was issued by the County of Orange for masks to be mandated across the county. A lot of people showed up, and it was even covered in a popular news site called Now's This, and across several media platforms, where they really captured the anger of the residents who were really upset over the order of wearing masks. So it was very visible, and they all came across as very assertive, very strong in their beliefs, and the tone of voice that a lot of those people chose to use was outrage, and clearly come across as this is something that they were not okay with. So that definitely resonated to the Board of Supervisors. All of the members on the board stayed and heard every single comment for that issue. So I definitely encourage, folks to really think about, with whatever it is that you are advocating on, like what tone of voice do you want to use, and is it wise for me to use this tone of voice during this particular section, or do I want to use do I want to come across as a little bit more respectful? So just be sure to strategize on that. And also be sure to speak from your heart. So include the values that you live by, and the solutions that you are providing in your comment as alternatives if you're trying to oppose something, or whatever it may be. And you also want to speak clearly. So be sure to enunciate, speak with an even pace. Try not to sound across as too rushed. That way they're actually able to understand what you're trying to say, and stay on your message. Try not to divert. That way you can stay focused on what it is that you're trying to get your point across. Specifically, if you're repping an organization at a hearing, talk about the significance of why your organization and the community that you work with cares deeply about the campaign. This is something that I think will really help them see that your organization is looking to help them figure out. And so if you're able to really convey that you are here to represent the values of the community, after based off the experience that you have after directly interacting with them, then the members of the board will be, I think, more compelled to really hear, because you are serving a large part of the constituency in the county. And then that's it as far as the presentation I have on tips. I will answer some of the questions that I noted as I was speaking, because I know a lot of folks who are interested in doing this and maybe have not experienced providing public comment. So somebody had asked if you have to be a citizen to do this. No, anybody is able to submit public comment and speak public if you want to go to a hearing. So there's no requirement for citizenship status for folks who maybe might not feel as comfortable going in person, and submit your comment via email. But the more they hear from the people who live and reside in the community, the better it is, because we're really amplifying the message across that this is something that the community is is trying to get addressed, especially like I said, as these hearings are coming into play. And then I don't know if I see any other questions on here. Okay, so Steve just submitted regarding the public comments that written comments are included as part of the minutes, so you can craft a story by having the comments build on each other. Steve says that from their own experience, being rushed and frustrated appears angry, so you might consider having a smaller group of very good speakers who share their comments through paper and then I'm sorry, so have a small group of speakers who can go and provide their comments in person, and then having others submit those comments in paper form. And then this is something that can also help get your message across more concisely if you organize and strategize with members of your organization, your group, your community, whatever it may be. So thank you so much for that, Steve. And so I don't see any other questions on here. So this is actually perfect timing, because we'll go ahead and close it out with the last couple of sections here that Rose will be covering to close us out and bring us home. So go ahead and take it away, Rose. Thank you.
Thank you, Daisy. And thank you so much for sharing all of that information. So first up, as Kat had shared, the Orange County People's Budget. So if you haven't already checked it out, please check out peoplesbudgetoc.org. How you can get involved: take the People's Budget survey if you haven't already. Share your story. So there is a storytelling component of the People's Budget. So we want to hear from you. We want to hear your stories. You can share pictures or art of anything that calls to you that you'd like to share. And then contacting the Board of Supervisors. So contacting your specific supervisor that's from your district, as well as the board in total, just to let them know what is your priorities. Next slide. So we have a couple actions coming up. So first and foremost, as was mentioned, the OC budget hearings going to be next week, Tuesday and Wednesday. Tuesday will be the primary day, and Wednesday is kind of overflow if they need it. It's usually a shorter day. But we will be out there. The People's Budget Orange County will be out there protesting for an OC budget that actually reflects the Orange County community. So if you can join us at 9 a.m. at the Hall of Administration, please come out, bring your signs, bring your voices. And we'll also be out there to assist for anybody who does wants to give public comments at that hearing. The next event that we have is on the 2nd, on Wednesday from noon to 1 p.m. will be an introduction of the People's Budget. So you got a little snippet of the budget survey as well as the People's Budget analysis. So to go into more detail, join us on Wednesday, September 2nd at noon to hear more about the People's Budget. Here is our time of if anybody has any announcements, upcoming actions, events, information that they'd like to share, please put it in the chat so that we can share with everybody. So of the couple upcoming events that we have, next slide. So transforming, one slide back. So Transforming Justice Orange County, we partnered with CURB and a couple other organizations to put together a virtual concert. Once we get, there you go, perfect. So this coming Saturday, if you have the time, the School's Not Prison. Some of you may have heard of it from years past. They do an annual tour. With the pandemic, this tour has now become virtual, which was a fantastic opportunity for Transforming Justice Orange County, as one of our big campaigns is to stop the music. So stopping the James A. Music jail expansion. So we partnered with Schools Not Prison, CURB, the People's Coalition, Yalla Indivisible, and OC No Justice No Peace, as well as a couple other organizations. and we're putting on this tour. So the actual event, the virtual concert starts at 5 p.m. Pacific, and it'll be streaming on YouTube, Facebook Live, as well as a couple other locations. You can find the link at Schools Not Prison. If you can join us a little bit earlier, there's going to be a pre-show that Latinos Justice and Latinos Rebel from New York are actually putting on, in which they're going to be showing a documentary series that they got funding to put together called Bad Hombres, as well as they're going to have an awesome panel just speaking about criminal justice, stopping the violence, and as well as reflecting on the Chicano moratorium, because actually this coming Saturday, August 29th, is the 50th anniversary of the Chicano moratorium. We're going to be commemorating Ruben Salazar, who was an LA Times journalist who passed away due to, from being in the Chicano moratorium, part of the march, and the police came and started to shoot rubber bullets. And so due to some altercations there, Ruben Salazar lost their life. So if you can make it out, join us, schoolsnotprison.com, and that's where you can find the link to the YouTube share. Alrighty, and I think last but not least is if you have the capacity, we appreciate donations just so that we can compensate our wonderful, wonderful speakers. And this is going to all the speakers across the Reimagine Justice series. So for everybody who has shared their experience, their knowledge, their stories, we appreciate your donations. But otherwise, so first and foremost, this workshop series is free. We want to make sure that everybody has the knowledge, has the power, and feels empowered to go out and make your voice heard with regards to the budget, with regards to current policies, with regards to what's happening in your community. I want to make sure that that's shared loud and widely. So, and I'll pass it back to, I'm not sure if it's Daisy or Mims, if you want to do any final closeouts and thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rose, for all of that information. This is the last of the 4-part series workshop. So we will be sharing the recording with folks. And then there are some of the links that we shared that will also be included with the PowerPoint slides once we send them out to everybody. And yeah, so just remember that these hearings are happening next week, and this is where they decide the budget for the next upcoming year. So very, very important for folks to really look at those resources that we emailed out to everybody, that was sent in the email prior to this with reading resources and so forth. And we'll be sending out the PowerPoint as well for folks who want to look into this over the next couple of days to help them prepare for the hearings next week. Thank you so much to all of our speakers who joined us and are still on the call to stay out for this presentation. So we really appreciate the support, and hopefully everybody can join us on Saturday as we wrap up the entire this entire series and really kick off September with activating the power of the people of Orange County to make those demands for the budget that we are looking to do. So thank you so much all, and have a good night.